Hi, my name is Reed Silverne. The name of the show is Fed Pride. The reason it's called Fed Pride is because I'm a federal worker and proud of it. I'm actually a federal worker, retired and rehired, so I can say that I'm a part-time federal worker. Everything you see on the show is live to tape. What that means is if I fall off the chair or if I have a disastrous technical problem, like I did last week when I tried to show some pictures and they were too big for the screen, you see it. Now, today for me is Friday. You'll be seeing me on Sunday on Channel 120, and on Tuesday on, I believe, I don't have the channel in front of me, but the regular analog channel. Tuesday evening, I believe it's 7 o'clock. So that'll change a little bit, an hour or so difference starting in September, but I'm still on my schedule right now. So the question of the day is, and the question from yesterday, or for last week as well, where is Annie Mae, my virtual co-host, and my media advisor? Annie Mae's on vacation, and even if she wasn't, I wouldn't be able to get a hold of her because my hard drive on my laptop has failed, and the program that I use to call her up live on the show, or live to tape on the show, is busted for now. So we're hoping to try to get everything all resolved by next week. Hopefully she'll be back from vacation. She'll be back in Malibu, where I talked to her. And it'd be interesting to see her take on all the shows that she missed and that I did while she was gone. So we'll see. However, I'm going to talk about a couple different things. I know that the last, I don't know how long, I've been obsessed with the situation with the economy, derivatives, with mortgage-driven derivatives, all of the things that have caused the recession, the commodity prices, CDOs, CCOs, and all the other things. And I promised myself I would talk about something else, at least part of the show, although I do have an interesting subject to talk about a little later about the ARSs that I was auction-rated securities I was talking about last week. So today I'm going to go back to a theme and an obsession that I had earlier this year and last year, and that is the new Cold War. Why do I call it the new Cold War? Because essentially a group of authoritarian, I won't say totalitarian countries, have been getting together and they've been supported by the new Russia under Putin. Putin was president until last year. Under their constitution, he was not allowed to run again. So what he did is he had his second in command, a guy that he knew in St. Petersburg named Medvedev, because an E in Russian script is actually a yeah. So some of the announcers and things like that have really gotten to enjoy calling him Medvedev instead of Medvedev. And he is the president, the new president of Russia. Now, Putin had built up the presidency of Russia to the point where he could rule by decree as president. The president could really do anything he wants. So what Putin did is he ran his party called United Russia, and it's almost like it's going back to the old system, although it's not communism, but a one-party system where one party dominates everything. And the United Russia Party won the legislative assembly elections in Russia by 73%. No other party can even win unless they had a minimum of 5%. So the UP, the United Russia Party, controls almost everything. And then I think the communists have a few, and then some nationalists have a few. But basically, it's a one-party system now in Russia. And Putin had taken over the media. He had taken over the oil industry with the exception of one little small oil company called, I believe it's TKP or TPK, and that one is half owned by British Petroleum, and the oligarchs of the what had been the two largest Russian oil companies, basically Khodorkovsky, who ran Lukoil, and the was Yukoil and Lukoil. And he basically, Putin had the heads of those oil companies thrown in jail or run out of the country. And he took over the oil industry and combined it with Gazprom, which was owned by the government even then, and combined them all into one super oil and gas company. They have gigantic, they produce about 10 million barrels a day of oil. They produce half of all of the natural gas that's used by the entire continent of Europe. They have three large pipelines. One pipeline goes through Belarus or through the Ukraine and comes in, I believe, through Hungary and comes into Italy. There's another one that goes up north that goes through the Baltic, through Poland, and then to Germany. And then there's another one that comes down, I believe, and it goes through Bulgaria down toward Greece. So basically about half the natural gas and almost all the oil used in Europe are controlled now by Russia. And not just by Russians, they're not independent companies, but almost exclusively by the Russian government. And so when Putin had to step down as president, he ran Medvedev as the new president of Russia. And then he took some of the powers away from the presidency. And because his party, the United Russia Party, had vast, like 80% of all the legislators in the assembly, he had himself appointed prime minister, and then he had some of the powers of the presidency devolved into the prime minister. Now, I had predicted that because the powers of the Russian president is so incredibly vast that eventually Medvedev would turn on Putin, but that has not happened. They're still loyal to each other, and Putin is really still running the show. And that's the way it is right now, and well, that's what we'll have to live with it. So what was the whole idea of the new Cold War? Well, about February of 2007, Putin had a speech. And in that speech, he basically called America hegemonist, and America and Europe and NATO, that they were trying to take over the world and that Russia was going to stop them, and basically kind of declared a new Cold War. The Russians have been building up their military-industrial complex. Putin started waving the flag with a blue water navy in the Mediterranean and the Pacific. He also started long-range bomber runs. And there were cases where Russian bombers went to Norway and turned back. Norway, of course, is in NATO, went over the edge toward Russia to see if we would scramble against them, and we did, and turned back, and so on and so forth. So the Russians started going back to their old ways. The Russians still have about 6,000 nuclear bombs after, I think, maybe 8, a lot lower than they did during the height of the Cold War when there were 24,000, but still enough to destroy the entire Earth. So they have a lot of potential powers. They have a lot of money. They're feeling their oats, and they're kind of making alliances throughout. The number one aim of the new Cold War Russia, which is, and I want to repeat this, it's authoritarian. It's not communist. As a matter of fact, they're very, very pro the Russian Orthodox Church. They completely rebuilt the Russian Orthodox Cathedral. I've actually been there. It's beautiful. And in Moscow. And they won back Chechnya, which had been taken over by Al-Qaeda types. It's right about here, north of Georgia. And they're definitely are feeling their oats. They feel, the Russians, one of the facts of Russian life throughout history, Russia there was a Russian kind of mini empire that stretched from Novgorod all the way down to the shores of the Black Sea in the 900s that became Russian Orthodox. But basically, Russia as we know it, or the forerunner to Russia, the Russian Empire, Tsarist Empire, started in the 1200s. Basically, the Mongols took over all of Russia and actually got as far as Poland, and this northern part of Poland was controlled by German knights called the Teutonic Knights, and had gotten as far as almost Hungary in two attacks. So they basically took over Russia. 150 years later, in the 1400s, the Mongols had started to fall apart or devolve. There were actually not that many Mongols in Russia, but they were very powerful. And the Mongols ended up with a Khanate of Sibir, which eventually became Siberia, and a Khanate of Turkestan, which was taken over by Tamerlane eventually. And Russia was started as the Duchy of Muscovy under Ivan the Terrible. And Ivan the Terrible eventually stopped paying tribute to the Mongol Empire, declared himself king, conquered back one by one each one of these duchies. He was a real authoritarian, always felt kind of a paranoid kind of guy, and extended his rule as far as he could. In the 1500s and 1600s, the Russians expanded all the way to the Pacific Ocean, and this part of Russia over here was controlled by China for hundreds of years. And basically the Russians, through an unequal treaty, got this part of Russia over here, which was controlled by China. Eventually, the Russians took over Kazakhstan, all these three little countries over here. The Ukraine was originally part of Poland and had revolted from Poland. The Orthodox Christian Ukrainians, they were called Cossacks in those days, went over to the Russian side, and the Russians got Ukrainian, Belarus, and then eventually took over the Baltic countries over here. And that was basically the Orthodox Russian Empire until communism took over. And I'm not going to go into the whole history of Russia, but the key to Russia is that it is except for the Ural Mountains, which are kind of low mountains anyway, kind of come up through here, it's a big trackless plain. It's vulnerable to attack from the west, vulnerable to attack from the Islamic world, from Persia, vulnerable to attack from China, vulnerable to attack from the Japanese. Basically, the Russians have always felt very, very vulnerable. And as a result, they're very expansionist. There's always a threat from one direction or another. And they've always been felt very, very vulnerable. And that's true now. Now I'm going to go to what I used to talk about a lot, which is the situation in Venezuela. Venezuela was taken over by a guy named Hugo Chavez back in the late 90s. Hugo Chavez almost lost control to an army coup because he was taking over the oil industry. And there was a big strike, and then the army tried to overthrow him in 2002. He is basically, for all intents and purposes, a communist. He believes in Cuban-style socialism. However, he was elected, and his path to power, or authoritarian power, has been very, very slow and deliberate. Hugo Chavez probably is a political genius, very, very intelligent guy, and he moved very, very slowly. First thing he did was abolish the Constitution after he was legally elected. Then he had a referendum. He subsidized all the people in the slums with free medical care, subsidized food, subsidized everything, subsidized gas, you name it. Everything is subsidized by oil revenue. Then he took over. He had a referendum. In the referendum, he abolished the Constitution, replaced it with replaced the legislature with a National Assembly. The National Assembly wrote a new Constitution, which of course was written by him, that he could rule longer. I think it was 2 6-year terms. Previously, there had been no re-election because that tends to create dictators in Latin America. And as a result, he had a series of referendums in which he gave himself more and more and more power. In 2002, the opposition he tried to take over the oil company. There was a giant strike. It went on for months. Almost no money was coming into Venezuela. And the army overthrew him for a couple days. And a general named Gaudel basically told the army to go back to its barracks and put Chavez back in power. After that, PVDSA, which is also city oil in the United States, that came under the control of the Venezuelan government and Hugo Chavez. Then, step by step, he took over the media, and there were riots when he shut down the company that made almost all of the soap operas in Venezuela. And since then have been gaining and gaining and gaining power until December of 2007. December of 2007, he was going to have another referendum, in which case they would basically change everything. He would be able to be reelected for life. He could rule by decree. He could keep the opposition from running for office, and he could take over any private industry that he wanted, and they would set up block committees, just like in communist Cuba, where everybody would inform on each other and run Cuba or run Venezuela. There were riots, and then on top of that, he lost the referendums. The first election in 10 years Hugo Chavez ever lost. And consequently, he backed away a little bit. Then there was another embarrassment because there's a guerrilla group, communist guerrilla group called FARC in Colombia, and the Colombians basically Bolivia and Ecuador are Chavez's allies. Basically, their campaigns for democratic elections were paid for by Chavez. And the Colombians attacked a FARC base across the border and found a computer. They killed the number 2 guy. The number 1 guy died in FARC. They found his computer, and in his computer it said that Hugo Chavez had spent $300 million setting up this guerrilla group or supporting the guerrilla group. It's actually 30 years old in Colombia, and they had 700 hostages, 3 Americans, the former presidential candidate in Colombia, and so on and so forth. And then there was another incident where they fooled the FARC people into releasing the 15 most significant of the hostages, the Americans and this ex-presidential candidate of Colombia, Ingrid Betancourt, and humiliated the FARC and basically freed some of the hostages. So the bottom line is, for the first time in his rule, Hugo Chavez is on the defensive. Now, what does this have to do with Russia? Well, Hugo Chavez has already bought $4 billion worth of Russian arms. He just went back to Russia a month ago and met with the new president of Russia, Medvedev, and made another deal for another $2 billion of arms, including the most advanced Russian anti-aircraft weapons, which might not be that good because Syria had the same thing and the Israelis were able to fly right by it. And also diesel submarines that can challenge the American Navy in the Caribbean itself. So $2 billion worth of arms, total purchase of $6 billion. Now, however, there are other problems that Hugo Chavez has. Basically, the price of food, and I've talked about the commodity crisis very, very often, has virtually doubled. And that is causing a lot of problems for the Venezuelan government because gas is like 30 cents a gallon over there because the whole difference in the price of gas is completely subsidized by the government. Consequently, almost all food is subsidized by the government, and those subsidies have had to double. Even though the price of oil has gone up, the price of oil has now turned back down a little bit, but all of the increase in costs, the subsidies, and so on and so forth are still very, very, very high. So a lot of Hugo Chavez's plans to kick America out of Latin America and to start an inter-American bank under his control, to start a big trading empire under his control, has basically fallen apart because the Peruvians don't want to go for it. Even his ally Correa in Ecuador, who had a bilateral agreement from the previous president with the United States, would not break the favorable trading terms of the United States in order to support Hugo Chavez. Colombia was his enemy, and Brazil, basically, which is becoming a superpower under a guy named Lula, who's also a left-winger, but non-authoritarian left-winger, basically is putting together a gigantic trading sphere which opposes the trading sphere of Chavez. So Chavez is losing out to Lula, the president of Brazil, as the number one influence in Latin America. Now, there's another guy. Basically, Chavez paid for the campaign of a guy named Evo Morales in Bolivia about 3 years ago. And Evo Morales decided to do the same process that took Chavez 10 years, instantly. And basically what he did was he had a referendum to get rid of the Congress. He actually put police around the Congress in order to kick them out, placed it with the National Assembly. However, the next round of referenda, which is to have a new constitution that basically gives Evo Morales total power to set up a socialist government, that has run into problems. Morales nationalized the natural gas industry and really irritated the Brazilians, because the Brazilians have basically built this natural gas industry in order to become energy independent of the rest of the world, and really offended Lula and the Brazilians. And then a whole bunch of governors, so he was trying to get total power, ran their own referendum in their own state that basically detached or gave autonomy to these states. Now Evo Morales, who has the largest population in his area of basically Native Americans or Native Bolivians, is trying to run a referendum that would remove all the independent governors of eastern Bolivia and give himself total power to issue a new constitution, rule by decree, and have total power over all of Bolivia. Is he going to win? He only has to get 53%. He probably is. But if he does, it's very, very likely that there may be a secession of these other states in Bolivia. My name is Reed Silverne. Name of this show is Fed Pride. Thank you very much.